I have a few little vests here. They can be keychains with that little hole. Some options, you can do the stitching around the edges or not. And then I like to do some engraving on the backs of them. But the sheepskin ones are a little bit different. It's two different patterns because it's just a little bit different. You can put the stitches on the top of the shoulders or have it go in like this. Show it how to do it in the video. This one's kind of trimmed up. Make it look a little more refined. This one I left ragged. With this one, I took some felt. I think it's a 1.6 millimeter felt. It's an ivory color. You can do white or whatever else you want. But I take the leather and I just do a real light coat of spray adhesive on the felt and the leather and then let it dry for a minute and then stick them together. You don't want to glue that. It's going to saturate and look weird. So that's how I do that. There'll be kits, patterns. I hope you like it. Going to start by printing out your pattern. They are just a little bit different. This one's just a little bit bigger, so you can cut inside the line for the sheepskin one versus the one for veg tan. And the corners are a little bit more pointed. It makes it look just a little bit better if you're sewing outside of that seam, whereas the veg tan one, a little bit more rounded corners. The holes with the white center you have to do, but the black dotted ones, those are optional if you want to do the stitching around the outside or not. You're going to use, for the veg tan one, like a 7 ounce. That works pretty good, maybe a 7/8. And then for sheepskin, you just want to make sure you're getting something relatively dense. If you go too thin, it's not going to have that rigidity it needs to look nice. But what I like to do is cut out a section that's just a little bit bigger than that, and then I'll trim it, but we'll get to that in a minute. For the sheepskin one, it's like my other sheepskin patterns. You're going to want to put tape over it. So it's a little stiffer, makes it easier to get your pattern traced onto your sheepskin. The veg tan leather one, we'll just cut out right outside the line because we're going to just tape this right to that piece of veg tan leather. And if you want, there's a couple different ways to do it if you wanted to do a felt lining on this one. I like to glue it to the back of the leather before I cut or punch holes or any of that. Not like a ton of glue or anything, just a light spray with some spray adhesive. Otherwise that glue, if you try to paste it on there like a contact cement, it's just going to soak into that felt too far. But the reason we cut outside the line is that we can tape it to that veg tan, and then we can really see that line where we're cutting. Get a more accurate cut when we cut the parts out. That's it to prepare the pattern for the veg tan. The sheepskin one, we're going to cut right on the line. We're going to punch those holes out. I think I'll punch those holes out first. It's not too crucial to have a specific size of a hole punch. You just want it big enough so you can trace through that hole. So this one is a 3/32 inch. I'm just going to use that to hit that one and these other two. Then I'll go a little smaller. Doesn't really matter a whole lot. And for the stitches, I'm just going to do just 5/64. So those ones are optional. You can do them, you can skip them if you want that stitching around the outside edge. And this hole punch might be a little big. It's a little bit bigger than the hole, so that's going to make it a little harder to see when I'm punching these out if I'm right over it. So I will go a little bit smaller. There, now I can really see that I'm centered. Punch all these holes, and cut this one out right on the line. And you can punch the holes after the fact if you want to, and this one's cut right on the line because we're going to use this just to trace it. We're not going to tape it down and cut it with the pattern on there. All right, everything's ready to go. With the sheepskin one, I do like to cut a little section out so I can just put a piece of tape on there. You can hold it down however you want to trace this on here, but I find a little piece of tape just helps keep everything straight. This is basically how I do all my sheepskin stuff. And with this one, just tape it right down to the leather like I would do any of my other leather patterns. And that's like, the sheepskin is like any of the sheepskin patterns I do. The only difference we're going to do with this one is we're going to have to trim that wool down a bit. You don't have to, it just looks better. Really personal preference. This one, punch all the holes. I suggest using a stitching chisel for all of these holes across the top here and around. These three right here on each side of this part are hidden, so you can just do a hole punch to make it a little easier. Just make sure the hole punch is small, otherwise you're going to have too much play in those two parts when they're sewn together. That's going to be for a little keychain loop. That's going to be for lace. And you can do a little test on the side to see how big you want those holes, but they are about as big as I like them to have. For tracing the pattern on the sheepskin, this is a heat erasable pen. The same pens I use for all my other stuff. I use these to make that sheepskin coat I did recently. Make sure the ink's flowing a little bit. And I'll hold it straight up and down. I don't go and change the angle at it because it could change the line a little bit. And the outside line, we're actually going to pretty much trim it off. The pattern's designed so we don't got to deal with that outside line. And most of these holes, this ink will just kind of flake off, and you can kind of scratch it off gently too. But it is heat treatable. If you put it in your dryer, definitely start real low because you can singe the wool. A hair dryer works good, but again, start on low and see how it works first. And it takes a second for this ink to kind of appear. I'm not pushing down too hard. I want to keep this accurate. Getting a little low. You'll notice when you use these pens, it goes through ink real fast. So I buy little packs of like 14. Those last for quite some time. So I'll finish tracing all these holes, trace this out, show you how I cut the pattern. You can see how bright those get after it sits for a little bit. This one doesn't have those extra stitches. This one does. And then you can do just leather, but that spray adhesive to a thin piece of felt. I think that's a 1.6 millimeter. You don't want it too thick. And then just a light coat of a spray adhesive on the felt and the leather. Let it dry a bit. Stick them together, and then you treat it as if it was just the leather. You can use a hole punch or a stitching chisel on that. This is just a small 1 millimeter hole punch. That's what I like to use for the sheepskin ones. I think we'll do this one. I like to punch the holes first, so I'm not fighting the edges and holding it down. It lines up a little bit easier. Make sure your hole punch is sharp so it grabs the sheepskin here. If it's real dull, it can slide around and misalign the holes. You can punch these bigger ones out for the rings and to tie that jacket closed. Or you can punch them right now. I believe I'm going with the 3/32 inch. You can do a test piece like I said before. So I like to use a stitching chisel for this one. However, that hole's probably a bit big. I'll use like a 1 millimeter hole punch. maybe a little bit larger for these 3 holes right there and right there, because those will be underneath and hidden. These top ones I will still do with the stitching chisel. You can do all of these with a stitching chisel too. Really personal preference. If you go too big, when you close that parts up together, they'll move around a little bit too much. With the stitching chisel, it's got a flat side, so I'll always make sure that flat side's lined up with the edge of the pattern. Make sure you get through far enough, otherwise you'll be fighting that needle and thread later. So I'll finish doing all the holes on these 2 parts and then we'll cut them out. I used a bigger stitching chisel, so what I'm going to do is just mark with an awl the center of these holes, so then I can kind of decide exactly where I want them so I don't get too close to the stitches. Be a little tricky to cut out. If you tip this knife up a little bit more, you can go around corners a little easier. Sharp blade. And I'll come straight off of those. And then I'll just nick those corners after the fact. Trying to go around that right now can be a little bit difficult. They won't come out as clean. If you have a couple spots that you need to clean up, you can use the sharp back side of this blade and push up and just kind of peel off that excess of that felt. Just let that back of the blade come across those corners and just nick them to round them off. And technically you probably don't have to do this, but for this one it'll look a little bit better. For the sheepskin ones, you want them corners to be a little more pointed. It'll end up looking better that way, but be careful if you're going towards the part. You can hit it with the back of that blade and mess it up. I got a couple little fuzzies left there. I'm gonna come back with scissors and cut those off instead of trying to pull it. But that one's done. How long you want to leave the fur is up to you. I like to cut it down pretty low, maybe like half of what's there. There's a few ways to do it. I'll just grab a pair of scissors and kind of hold them straight across it. You can come in with a smaller pair to clean it up. I like to do this beforehand too, because sometimes the edges don't always get hit as well. But you can kind of go across this just to make sure you can see everything you're doing. Just to get it up a little bit higher, throw it on something like this. I've tried like razors and stuff, and for some reason they don't work very good trying to just thin this out. You can kind of feel the density too. See where it's a little too thick still. Once I get it close, then I'll cut this out. It's good to do this on a little separate area of your table or even outside. Out of sheepskin stuff, this makes a mess. The other things I do, it's a lot easier to maintain a clean area, but doing this is pretty messy. So when you're cutting a pattern out, just use the tip of the scissors, hold it up against underneath the skin, and just do little clips. And what we're trying to do is just barely cut that white line off right on that internal edge. So we don't got to deal with heat treating it or anything to get rid of that ink. And it wears off too. These pens I use, they don't penetrate the material. It kind of sits on the surface. So it's not like a huge deal to try to get rid of every remnants of it. A lot of sheepskin coat makers and things will just use a real sharp razor blade or something to cut parts out. But from classes I've taught and things, this is still the method I use. I can just get better results, less errors. Might take a little bit longer. I'd rather give it a few more minutes and get better results than trying to hurry through anything. These tight corners, I do real small little clips. A couple more options are to just leave those edges as is, so they're real fuzzy. It's up to you too. I'll probably leave this one, but I'll do this one and I'll show you how to trim those edges to make it look a little cleaner. Personal preference. This one I'm going to trim how I actually like to do them, and I'm cutting straight across from that edge. I'm not angling it in yet anyhow. I'm not going to go into that circle quite yet. Sometimes it helps to rub it because I just cut this out. Very similar to how I'll do a refined edge for mittens or whatever if you've done anything else on my sheepskin patterns. And then to get into those curves, I'll just fold this over, match those edges up. Be careful not to cut into the leather part or the skin part. So once I get that straight across those edges, you can go across and refine it again, but I'll curve those edges a little bit. So then I'll come at it and just nick that corner like a 45-degree. Can always take a little more, so I'll be patient. So you can kind of refine it a little bit more now at this point if you want. You can wait until after you do the sewing and stuff. I like to do it now and get it as close as I can. That way, just in case I make a mistake and cut into the skin or something, I didn't waste time sewing it. I'm using a saddle stitch with the needle on each end to do this. So I'll just start by going through, but I'm riding the skin a little bit and coming right back out. I'm going to even these up. And then fall to the same side every time, so I'll just let this go away. And same thing, just kind of ride the skin, pop back out. So I make sure to kind of pull that down a little. That way the stitches will look nicer if we're falling on the same side every time nicely. You don't want to really pull on this at all because you're just going to bunch everything up. Just the tiniest, littlest bit will give it a little shape, but if you pull too much at all, it's going to bunch it up weird. The biggest thing for not pulling the fibers back through the wool is riding along that skin. If you go down and come back up, you can see how it's already grabbing some. But if you go in and just ride that skin, you're not going to pull that wool back through. Got all the way around. And since I'm turning these edges in when I sew them, I'm just going to grab this last stitch here and go straight through. And then the same with this one. And then I'll tie a little knot. Because these stitches need to be pretty loose, and then the ones where we're sewing the two ends together need to be a bit tighter. So I don't want it to tighten up and bunch anything up down the road. I'll throw a little dab of glue on that knot, but for now I'll leave those long. So that's that. Now I can just use what I have left over from before, is we're going to turn these edges in. So I'm just going to flip them together this way and sew them. And if you need to trim a little bit of this back to see those holes, you can. So it can be pretty difficult to get the needle through each side if you can't see these holes at all. You can do this beforehand so you don't risk cutting that thread. But being able to see those, it just helps. With this, I only have a needle on one end of the thread. We'll just pick a side to start on. Leave enough to tie a knot. Just hold it with my thumb. I'm going to go around to the next hole. And then again. I'm going to go around the end on that side, so I'll just go through that same hole again. And then make sure this goes over the outside of the edge. Holds those two layers together real nice. Then we'll just fall back to the other side. This is the exact same way you'd sew the other sheepskin. If you were putting the seams to the outside, you would just pinch them together the opposite way. But I'll go over that just to make sure we got all our bases covered. Go through that first hole. And we're going to want to go again so we can go around the outside. And then I like to do like a saddle stitch so that seam doesn't open up when you flip it back. So now I'm just going to go all the way down and back, just with like this single thread. which I'll have to double it up right here so I can get that last one across that edge. Then what I'll do is just fall back through that center hole and then tie these two ends together. And like always, I like to put just a little dab of glue. Make sure nothing comes undone. When that dries, we can clip all that excess off. I'm just going to let it be, get rid of anything extra so it doesn't get in our way. And I'll do that same exact thing to this side, and then we'll flip it back right side out. Kind of the same deal as before, but we're gonna just bring those two edges together. I like to kind of get as much of that down and out of the way as possible. Can put a clip on there, but it's such a small side. So what I'm going to do actually is start in the middle. I'm going to start in the first hole there. And I'll kind of hold that excess. Same as before, looping it around. So we're on that first hole, so I went to the second hole so that it's crossing over. Want to get it snug, but don't wrench on it, you could tear through. And then go through that hole a second time, same as before, and then this one will be going around that outside edge. Like that. And then just work our way back, that center hole. First one, go through that first hole again. Now you could technically stop. I like how it looks if I do the saddle stitch back and forth. It's a little stronger too, not that it matters as much on a keychain, but then this last one, I'm going to just fall to the inside. Did I miss a hole? I think I missed a hole. If that's the case, you have to take the needle off. You can't go back through the hole. You're going to grab wool and cause more problems than you solve. I did miss a hole, so. Center hole first. There we go. Now this is the one that will just fall to the inside. And then that other end is already on the inside. You just have to pull it in there. Could even flip this. And then we're going to tie a knot. This is pretty furry, so I'm going to kind of get some of this out of the way so that knot drops in there. Little dab of glue. And usually I'll wait till that dries to cut it close, but I'm going to risk it. And that's that top seam, if you want it done that way. Kind of even these out a little if you want. Make them look uniform. Sometimes I'll go over an additional time from the outside and then straight over, but I found with this little seam that gets to be a little too much. It looks kind of sloppy. So, all right, let's do this one with the felt on the back. Again, I'm using the saddle stitch needle on each end. 4 times the length. That's probably a little more than I need, but I'd rather have too much than not enough. And I'm just going to start right on the corner, go all the way around, and meet right back up. This is a little thicker, denser leather, so we can pull these stitches a little tighter. Not that you really need to. These aren't going to be under any stress. But I do like to snug them up a little bit, because then it just gives that a little bit more shape, a little more three-dimensional shape. Let me throw this in the stitching pony and really burn through this quick, and then we'll come right back. On that last hole, again, you can do this however you want, but this is how I do it. Just going to finish up on the last hole there. And I'm just going to leave those on there and use that to sew this first side. Helps to give it a bend with the stiffer veg tan leather, so you're not fighting it as much. I'm going to start by this one that's up. I'm just going to come through and leave that right in the middle. Actually, just cut that off, let that be. Then this one that's on that first hole, that's going to come down that first hole on that. So I'm just going to let that be kind of out of the way if I can. And you can throw a clip on there or something. We're not going to tighten these completely up yet. Let's go through one side at a time. See, we're getting there. Back down this one. Now I'll tighten it up, and what I'm going to do is hold that where it should be while I tighten that up, because that's going to want to peel apart from this inside hole. We're going to want to make sure that's turned in and stays that way. That's why really bending it and loosening it up prior helps, because it won't be pulling apart as much. We'll go through. We're going to double these stitches up. Okay, so I want to tie that knot in between them two layers. It's a lot easier. Some of that wax builds up when you're pulling them tight. It's a lot easier if I can flip this inside out, and I don't want it to pull apart. So I'm going to really pinch those together and hold that tight when I flip this around. You don't have to do this. I do it because I feel like I can get in there a little bit better. Actually, I shouldn't have pulled that needle off quite yet, because we got to go back through so it can tie in between the layers here. Just a little bit of glue. leave just the tiniest bit of slack, and we'll push that back in there. Not all the way through, just down past the edge. And then pinch that again when you flip it. And we'll just do the same thing to the other side. So for that leather lace, you can cut strips of like a chrome tan or something if you want to do that. I'm just using my actual leather lace with just a little bit of saddle soap. You want some moisture in it so that it's not floppy, but pliable, because it's pretty stiff. That way when you put it through and then it dries, it'll hold that shape. I have heard you can use like other soaps as long as they're like not heavy scented or something. Or even just a little water. I've done that, but I think a little bit of saddle soap helps the longevity. It puts that oil, a little bit of the oils back into this leather lace. So I'm not putting a ton of that soap into it. I'm not really yanking on this either. I'm just working that in until it gets good and floppy. Well, not floppy, but pliable, like I said. It feels pretty good. I will kind of rub my hands off with a paper towel. And get rid of the little excess on there. You want to cut a nice angle point to these so that you can just do it without a needle. However, you can use a lace needle or whatever you need to do. Through that way, with the good side underneath, we'll come over like that, and then we're going to pull that over the top of that one underneath there, so it kind of will lock it in when we tighten this up. I like to kind of snug it up first, but that bottom one doesn't always want to get pulled tight. So I'll grab something and get it tight underneath. And then pull the rest of that. I'll set those folds into it. And just like that, I'll cut a little bit of this excess off. I like to leave a little hanging, or if you cut about that, like an inch and a half, you can just turn them up into the coat. Little sheepskin vest.